The 2025 Zephyrus G14 and G16 are the best all-round laptops that money can buy. They're powerful enough for pretty much anything, but are still incredibly thin and lightweight. But some people prefer a bigger display, while other people prefer a more compact package. So what are the differences between these two? And is either one better than the other? Well, let's find out once and for all if size truly matters. What a stupid question. Of course it matters. From the outside, the Zephyrus G16 is literally just a bigger G14. They both have a full aluminum body, which can take quite a bit of abuse. The G16 has a tiny bit more flex on the body, but only because it's physically bigger. The smaller G14 is actually a little thicker, but only by like a couple of millimeters, which is barely noticeable. But the G16 is a bit heavier, but not by a whole lot. It's actually impressive how light this thing is for a 16-inch gaming laptop. But factually, the Zephyrus G14 is still a smaller, thinner, and more compact package, so it will be easier to carry around. Now, I tried to spec them out as close as possible, but this year the G14 comes with an AMD chip, while the G16 comes with an Intel chip. The G16 does have AMD variants, but those are only available with an RTX 5060 or 5070. The G14 can be spec'd from an RTX 5060 up to a 5080, but the G16 can go all the way up to an RTX 5090. The G14's GPU goes up to 95 watts with an extra dynamic boost up to 120 watts. And the G16's GPU goes up to 105 watts, with an extra dynamic boost bringing it up to 125 watts. So the G16 has around 5 to 10 watts more power for its RTX 5070 Ti. This should make it a little faster, but not by a whole lot. Either way, the G16 has a larger body, so it has more space for cooling and it can use more power, which should mean more performance. And more space also means a little extra space for ports. The only difference between these two is that the G16 has a full-size SD card slot, while the G14 has a micro SD card slot. Technically, the G16 has Thunderbolt 4 instead of USB 4 on the G14, but it's basically the same. Now, since it uses more power, the G16 also has a slightly higher wattage power brick. So it's a little bigger, thicker, and heavier, but it's not really noticeable unless you put them side to side. But you could always use an even smaller charger if you'd want to, since they both support USB-C charging up to 100 watts. And in these new 2025 models, you can charge it through both USB-C ports, which is very handy. A bigger laptop does not mean a bigger keyboard though. It might have more space, but the G16 has the exact same keyboard as the G14. They both have a full RGB backlight, but only one lighting zone and no per key RGB like on Razer laptops. The G16 uses all that extra space for bigger speakers, but we'll have to see what those sound like later on in the video. The G16 does use that extra space for a bigger trackpad though, and it is way bigger than on the G14, but that does make it feel a little less balanced. I still prefer using the G16's trackpad over the G14 though. Having this much space for your hand to move around is just awesome. The biggest difference between these two though is their displays. The G14 has a 14-inch 120Hz OLED display, while the G16 has a bigger 16-inch 240Hz OLED display. These two OLED types are the exact same, which means both have awesome colors, infinite contrast, and amazing looking blacks. The G16 actually has a slightly lower resolution than the G14, even though it has a bigger display. But a bigger display does mean it will be better in games where you need to look very far. For example, in games like Battlefield, where an enemy could be kilometers away, you'll see them a lot easier on the G16. Or if you're holding long on Dust 2 and CS2, it'll be a lot easier to spot enemies on the G16 as well. Now the G16 also has double the refresh rate of the G14, and I really do notice the difference when playing fast-paced games. Yes, 120Hz is very nice, and more than enough for most people, but the G16 just gives you that little extra edge. Other than that, they get just as bright at 500 nits, but the G14 actually gets a lot darker for some reason. But they both have the same anti-reflective layer, so outdoor use won't be a problem on either one of them. Both of these displays will be great to play games on, watch movies on, and basically anything else you can imagine. But while they probably have the same display hinge, the G16 is definitely a little bit more wobbly. You won't notice this if you're using it on your desk, but if you're on the move a lot with your laptop, this can definitely get a little annoying. Now I'm really curious to see how their speakers compare. Because how much better are the G16 speakers with all that extra space? Well, they're a little better. They get a little louder, have slightly more bass, and overall just a slightly larger soundstage. They're essentially just sized up G14 speakers. They both sound amazing though, and you will not be disappointed by either one of them. The Zephyrus G14 and G16 use the same webcam and microphone as far as I know, so it's not surprising to see basically no difference between them. I might be blind and deaf though, so let me know what you think. Both of these laptops also support G-Helper. This is basically just a lightweight, open source replacement for Armoury Crate with a very simple user interface. In here you can set custom power profiles, custom fan curves, and undervolt the CPU for less power usage, heat, and even a little more performance. The G16 does not support undervolting though, since it has an Intel processor. But the G14's AMD chip easily handled a -15 undervolt, which made it perform a little better and also last a little longer. I did a full tutorial on G-Helper, so go check that out if you're interested. Which finally brings us to performance. Is the G16 faster because it has more power and cooling to work with? Well, in Cinebench R23, the G16 does outperform the G14 by a little bit, especially in the single core score, which should be great for gaming. And in 3D Mark TimeSpy, we see the same thing where the G16's higher wattage RTX 5070 Ti slightly outperforms the G14. But I want to see some real performance. So how do these two compare in some actual games?
Huh? Okay. I love you, man. Huh? Okay.
Kinda game.
You motherfucker, man. You motherfucker, man.
I'll hack you to pieces. Ha! You'll never take me down.
Uh-oh.
Metal toast.
As you saw, they performed very similarly, but the G16 was slightly faster. This should be no surprise since they have almost identical specs, but the G16 just has a little more power to work with. But this difference is not big at all, so I would not make a purchasing decision solely based on these facts. The G16's Intel CPU does have more cores than the G14's AMD CPU, but the HX370 actually has more performance cores than the Ultra 9 285H, which is something to consider. Now, where the G16 falls behind quite a bit is in battery life. I tested and compared them in two scenarios, under light use and during gaming. During the light use scenario, I played a YouTube video until their batteries died, with their displays at full brightness, at 60 Hz, and with their dedicated GPUs turned off. And the G14 lasted almost double as long as the G16, which is a huge difference. Sure, the G16 does have a larger battery, but the Intel chip in here is a slob for power, which affects it a lot more. And in the gaming test, I played Battlefield 1 on battery with the same settings as before. And while the G14 did outlast the G16 by a little bit, they're both nothing special. And you should not buy a gaming laptop expecting a portable gaming experience. I guess it still rings true in this generation that AMD CPUs are just a lot more power efficient than Intel CPUs. Now, last year's Intel Zephyrus G16 had some serious temperature issues. So did that get fixed this year? Thankfully, yes. Both the G14 and G16 CPUs stayed around a maximum of 88 to 90 degrees Celsius under high load, which is comfortably below its maximum. And the same goes for their GPUs, where they both reached a maximum of 86 degrees Celsius, which again is perfectly fine. So it seems that this year, both of them are cooled very well, and you won't experience the heat death of the universe if you go with an Intel chip. But how does their fan noise compare? The G14 is a little louder than the G16, and it also has a slightly higher pitched fan noise, which you might prefer or not. In terms of upgradeability, the G16 is a little better. They both have a replaceable Wi-Fi card, which is handy, but while the G14 only has one M.2 SSD slot, the G16 has two. So you can easily upgrade your storage without replacing your current Windows drive. Both of them have soldergram though, which kind of sucks. So you'll have to choose your configuration wisely. Which brings us to pricing. The G16 should be more expensive because it's a lot bigger, right? Well, it really depends on the model. This year, the configurations are really confusing. The Zephyrus G14 has AMD chips on all models, but some RTX 5060 and 5070 configs have a slower Ryzen 9 270 CPU. The Zephyrus G16 uses Intel chips for the RTX 5070 Ti models and above. But again, it has way slower AMD CPUs on some RTX 5060 or 5070 configs. Now, the models I used in this video with the fastest CPU and the RTX 5070 Ti are both actually the same price at $3,000. The cheaper models can be found for way less money, but again, they have way slower processors. So at that point, I would just get last year's AMD models. Which brings us to the big question. Which one of these is better, the G14 or the G16? Well, I actually have a pretty simple answer for this one. If you prefer a bigger display, get the Zephyrus G16. But if you want a more compact package with longer battery life, then get the Zephyrus G14. The performance difference really is not that big, and everything else is a minimal difference. So the choice should be pretty easy. The G16 is literally just a bigger G14. Now, I've tried both as my main machine, and I just really like the compact size of the Zephyrus G14. The fact that such a powerful machine can be this small and still easily handleable with one hand is basically magic to me. So I'll be keeping this one as my personal machine from now on. Now let me give a huge shout out to my YouTube members. Soundwive, Thomas, Inky, Mr. Frosty Dude, Dropzone1, Martijn Snijkers, David Gill, Flimsy, Lawrence De Fabrizio, Aki, Disco Volante, Walter, Shurianch, Daniel, Mr. Nuke, SebaGS, Christian Sands, Real Elf, Squash Bond, Alan, Toasted, A Random Guy, and QME. If you become a YouTube member, you get early access to content of mine, a shout out at the end of every video, and you'll also be supporting me as a creator to make these videos. And of course, you'll also be part of the Cool Guys Club, so you can use cool gifts like these in the comment section. So join the club if you're interested, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.
It is cheaper to buy vegetables here.